Eli was 31, an architect and builder based in Colorado, known for his precision, his patience, and the kind of quiet resolve that made clients trust him without ever needing to raise his voice. To strangers, he was the definition of put together. But with family, Eli always carried a tension he couldn't shake, like his presence made the air heavier. It started when he came out at 26. He didn't plan a dramatic announcement. It wasn't in a holiday toast or a family group chat, just a thoughtful email sent on a Sunday afternoon, carefully worded, respectful, almost too polite. He wrote, "I hope this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know I'm gay." And then he waited. Hours passed, then days, then months. No reply, no phone call, just silence. No one disowned him, no one screamed. They just stopped inviting him to things. First it was Easter, then Sarah's engagement dinner. He found out about her wedding through a tagged photo on Facebook. They didn't block him, they didn't delete him, they just treated him like a tab they never opened again. And somehow that was worse, because silence doesn't give you anything to fight against. It just sits there, heavy and cold, until you start to wonder if maybe you deserved it. Eli told himself to move on. He poured himself into his work, designed homes for strangers who sent thank you cards and Christmas baskets, built porches for young couples who invited him to their baby showers. And still, deep down, some part of him kept hoping his own family would come around. So when his sister Sarah called out of nowhere and said she and her husband were finally building their dream home, Eli felt something spark. She asked if he'd design it. Over the phone, she laughed, "It just wouldn't feel right without you involved." She didn't mention the 5 years of silence, the birthdays missed, the quiet exile, and Eli didn't ask. He just said yes, because he wanted back in. Not just to the family group chat or the dinner table. He wanted to feel like his name meant something again. He wanted them to see him not as the gay son or the awkward brother they didn't know how to explain to their church friends. He wanted to be Eli, the one who showed up, who worked hard, who made something beautiful. So he threw himself into it. No contract, no payment, 9 months of work. He revised blueprints until 2 in the morning. He met with their plumber on weekends. He made 3 trips out of town just to source the perfect wood beams for her vaulted ceilings. Not for the money, not for the recognition, for the chance that maybe this house would bring him closer. That maybe if he gave them something real, something they lived in every day, they'd finally let him back in. If you've ever tried to earn your place in a family that only sees parts of you, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories. We tell the stories most people try to forget. The morning of the housewarming party, Eli stood in front of the mirror adjusting his collar for the 5th time. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, but part of him couldn't help hoping someone would notice how much he had put into this day. The bottle of wine he chose wasn't fancy, but it was the same label his parents had once served during Thanksgiving when he was still invited. It was a quiet nod to better times, an offering across the gap. He stepped into his truck and drove the familiar winding road toward the hills where his sister's house now stood. Perched like something out of a design magazine, clean lines, wide eaves, natural stone, and warm cedar that caught the light like honey. It was beautiful, and it had come from his hands. Every decision, from the shape of the windows to the grain of the cabinets, had passed through him. For 9 months, he had carried that project like it was his own child. Now it stood finished, and he didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. When he arrived, the driveway was already lined with cars. Laughter spilled from the open door, the kind of cheerful chaos he used to be part of. He took a breath, grabbed the wine, and walked in. Sarah met him at the kitchen island. She looked radiant, a glass of champagne in hand, her voice bright. "Eli, everything looks amazing," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Seriously, you made our dream real." Bo, he smiled and nodded. This was the moment he'd played in his head 100 times. His sister beaming, maybe even introducing him to a few people, pointing to him and saying, "That's my brother. He built this." But none of that came. She moved on quickly, turning to greet a cousin. Eli stood there, wine still in his hand, waiting. A few relatives walked past, some offering polite nods, others avoiding his eyes altogether. He wandered into the living room where people sat on plush furniture he had picked out. sipping cocktails beside a fireplace he had designed. And not one of them knew. No one mentioned the months he spent on scaffolding or the hours he spent tweaking the HVAC plans when the city codes changed. He was a ghost in the house he had brought to life. In the kitchen, his mother stirred a pot on the stove. He stepped closer and said softly, "Hey, Mom." She looked up, startled, and managed a small smile. "Oh, Eli, I didn't realize you were here already." He gestured to the wine. "Thought this might go well with dinner." She nodded quickly, then glanced toward the dining room where the table was already set, every chair taken. "It's beautiful," he added, trying to keep his voice light. She hesitated and then said it, the sentence that split the room like a crack in the foundation. "Sweetheart, would you mind sitting out back for dinner? Some of the guests are, a bit traditional. We just don't want to make things complicated." He blinked. "What do you mean out back?" She lowered her voice. "Just for dinner. We'll set up a small table on the patio. It's still nice outside. You'll be more comfortable anyway." He turned to look at the dining room. There was his sister's husband seated at the head. There were his cousins, his uncle who used to slip him $20 bills at Christmas, his aunt who once gave him his first drafting set, all talking, all laughing. And not one extra chair, not one space left for him. A folding table had been set up outside near the edge of the patio, 2 plastic chairs, a paper plate already resting on a napkin. He walked toward it slowly, the bottle still in his hand. The air had cooled and a faint wind picked up, rustling the paper napkin off the table. He bent to catch it, heart pounding, and sat down, staring through the glass at the people inside. It wasn't the table that hurt, it was what it meant. It wasn't about logistics, it was about being moved, being positioned, being placed just close enough to hear the music, but too far to be part of the song. He had drawn every line of that house. He knew the exact number of stairs in the back hallway. He had measured the countertop height by hand. He had stood in that yard 6 months ago explaining the grading plan under a summer sun, sweat dripping down his back while Sarah said, "We trust you." Now they trusted him enough to build their dreams, but not enough to sit next to their friends. A child came to the door, his niece, 5 years old, hair braided like her mother's used to be. She pointed through the glass. "Mommy, why is Uncle Eli outside?" The room quieted. For a moment, everyone turned. Eli raised his glass slightly and smiled. His sister walked quickly to the child, knelt down, whispered something. Then she closed the door. Not slammed, just gently clicked it shut. And Eli sat, a single plate in front of him, as the lights glowed warm on the inside, and the cold crept in across the concrete beneath his feet. Eli sat there through the entire meal. No one came out, not with a second plate, not with a fresh drink, not even to say, "How's it going out here?" The patio light above him flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the stonework he'd installed himself. The wind picked up again. It rustled the leaves of the Japanese maple in the corner of the yard, the one he'd chosen for its color burnt orange in the fall, like the sun just before it drops behind the Rockies. He stared at it now, unmoved. The house glowed behind him, full of noise and motion. Glasses clinking, forks tapping porcelain, laughter rolling in waves. None of it touched him. The food on his plate had gone cold. He hadn't touched the wine. He just sat, listening to a party that had decided he wasn't part of the celebration. And yet he had built the reason for it. Every wall, every beam, every line of sight from the open kitchen to the vaulted ceiling in the living room, he had created all of it. His name wasn't on the deed, but it was under the surface of every square foot. He had poured himself into this house, thinking maybe, just maybe, they would let him back in, not just into the house, into their lives, into the role he once had before he came out, before he became that one in the family. But here he was, outside, 2 chairs and a table folded into the corner like an afterthought. It would have hurt less if they'd said no from the start, if they'd refused his help, told him outright, "We'd rather pay someone else." But instead they had smiled and said thank you. They had praised his talent. They had asked for his advice. They had called him late at night when they were unsure about the tile or the lighting plan or whether the pantry needed to be that big. They had treated him like family when it meant getting something out of him. And now that it was time to celebrate, to gather and be visible and present, he was back to being invisible. An extra, a liability, a risk they didn't want to explain, a crack in their perfect story. He looked through the sliding glass door again and saw his father at the table. The same man who hadn't spoken to him in almost 2 years. His mother leaned over to pour him more wine. They clinked glasses with Sarah's in-laws. Nobody seemed bothered. Nobody looked toward the patio. Eli's chest tightened. He wasn't angry, not exactly. What he felt was harder to name. It was the ache that comes when something breaks. Not loudly, not with force, but with a soft, final snap. Like the thread of hope finally giving up. He had held on too long. The house was a chance, he thought. An offering. An act of love that might rebuild the bridge. But that wasn't how bridges worked. They only held weight if both sides believed the other was worth reaching. A small voice piped up behind him. He turned. His nephew stood there, the boy barely 10, holding a half-eaten piece of cornbread. "Uncle Eli, why are you eating by the trash cans?" Eli looked down. He hadn't realized it before, but he was sitting right beside the big black garbage bins. The smell of old takeout and lawn clippings reached him now, subtle but present. He looked back at the boy and managed a soft smile. "Just wanted some fresh air, buddy." The boy frowned, "But everyone else is inside." Eli said nothing. What could he say? That some people only invited you in when it suited them? That sometimes love came with terms in small print you never saw until it was too late? The boy hesitated, then wandered back inside. Eli heard him say something to his mother, but the glass was thick and the music too loud to make out the words. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared at the door. She didn't step outside, just opened it halfway. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, voice light, as if he were just taking a break, as if this was all normal. "Fine," he said. She hesitated, looked down at his plate. "I hope it's not too cold out here." Eli looked at her. Really looked. The sister who had braided his hair when they played dress-up. The girl who used to steal his snacks but always shared her blanket during storms. Now a woman who had let him pour himself into her dream and couldn't give him a chair at her table. "It's fine," he said again. She nodded like she wanted to say more but didn't. "Well, we're doing cake soon." He nodded. "I'll watch from here." She gave a small laugh like it was a joke, but his face didn't change. Then she closed the door. The click this time didn't feel gentle. It felt final. He finished his wine slowly. The cold air crept into his sleeves, the night stretched on. When the laughter inside swelled again, he stood, left the plate untouched, and walked back to his truck. As he turned the key in the ignition, the house lights flickered through the rearview mirror. A house full of people, full of warmth, full of family, and yet somehow emptier than he had ever imagined. 1 month passed and no one said a word. No apology, no check-in, no, "Hey, sorry about the mix-up." The housewarming party came and went, and so did the silence after it. Eli didn't expect flowers or grand gestures, but he thought someone, his sister, maybe his mom, would at least text, would at least try to explain. But instead, his phone remained still, like it had learned the same posture his family had: avoid eye contact. Keep things polite but distant, pretend it never happened. He buried himself in work. Drafted blueprints for a lakeside cabin. Met with an older couple about a barn conversion. Threw himself into a remodel in Boulder that had him driving 3 hours a day. Anything to keep his hands busy and his head clear. But at night, when the emails stopped and the sawdust settled, he'd lie awake and replay that folding chair. That cold plate. That child's voice asking why he was beside the trash. It wasn't just about that night. It was about everything it confirmed. That their affection was conditional. That his skills were useful, but his existence still came with an asterisk. He told himself to forget it. Told himself he was over it. But grief is a tricky thing. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits there quietly, like a shadow on your chest. Then one afternoon, as he was measuring an archway in a nearly finished home, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his jaw tighten. Sarah. He stared at it for a second, debating whether to answer. But curiosity won. He picked up. "Hey." "Hey," she said, voice too cheerful, like she could hear the distance and was trying to fill it with sugar. Hope you're good. The house is amazing. We still get compliments every time someone visits. I've been meaning to tell you, you're a genius. He waited. Anyway, she continued, I have a small favor. Totally fine if you're too busy, but we've been thinking about adding a detached garage. Just something simple, nothing fancy. The budget's tight, so we thought maybe if you're not slammed. She trailed off. Silence pulsed between them. Eli felt a strange kind of calm. Not anger, not even surprise, just the final puzzle piece falling into place. He took a breath. You want me to design and build your garage? If you have time, she said quickly, even just the design would help. You always have the best eye for, he cut her off. Let me save you the trouble. I think the garage should be about 15 feet from the main structure. That way it lines up perfectly with the dining room window. She sounded pleased. Oh, that's a great idea. That would give us such a nice view from the... And that's exactly the distance between the house and the folding chair, Eli said. Her voice stopped. Not a sound. That night, remember? The one where I built your dream home and then had to eat beside the garbage bins because apparently the people you invited can't handle a gay man at the dinner table. Still nothing. You didn't forget that, right? He added. Because I didn't. She exhaled, but it wasn't an apology, just a soft Eli. Like she wanted to reset the conversation without ever admitting what had gone wrong. He didn't give her the chance. You asked for my name on the permit. You asked for my name on the construction documents. You even asked if I could be the main contact with the county when the inspector came. You asked for my name when it helped. But when it came to a chair at your table, suddenly my name wasn't worth much. She tried again. I didn't mean... You didn't say anything, he said. That's the part that hurt most. Not the people at the table. You, Mom, Dad. No one said a thing. You all just watched me sit there like it was normal. Like I hadn't spent 9 months of my life making your home happen. The silence turned brittle. He could hear her breathing, could almost picture her twisting the phone cord like she used to do when they were kids. So no, he said, his voice even. I won't be designing your garage. I won't be drawing one more line for a family that can't look me in the eye unless they need free labor. I'm not angry, Sarah. I'm just done. She said nothing. Not goodbye, not I understand. Just a pause. And then the call ended. Eli lowered the phone and stared out the window of the home he was finishing. Sunlight poured across the beams, catching the grain of the oak flooring. The couple who owned the place had left a note on the counter that morning. Thank you for building the place where we'll grow old together. And suddenly Eli realized how long it had been since anyone said something like that and meant it. His family had gotten his time, his skill, his love, but never once, not once, had they said thank you without strings attached. He wasn't angry, he was just tired. Tired of proving himself. Tired of earning their silence. Tired of building things for people who never really saw him. So he walked through the house one last time, ran his fingers along the edge of the new railing, stepped out the door, and closed it behind him without looking back. The land wasn't much, just a sloped patch outside Boulder, tucked between pine trees and scrub brush. But it was his. It sat quiet, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to Eli, it was a blank page, a second chance. He signed the lease with hands that didn't shake, even though his savings were thinner than he liked. He could have kept taking high-paying projects, could have chased clients with glossy dreams and deeper pockets. But this was going to be different. Not for a magazine spread, not for someone else's Pinterest board. This time, the house would be for one person only, him. He designed it in the evenings, after work, the plans unfolding across his desk like poetry. A single-level layout with wide windows and a skylight over the reading nook. A tiny kitchen with enough room for fresh basil by the sink. And a porch not big, just enough for 2 chairs, in case someone came by who didn't flinch when he said who he was. Every beam, every corner was intentional. Not to impress, not to earn anyone back, just to exist in truth. He poured the foundation himself, mixed the concrete in batches, his gloves stiff with dried lime. The first wall went up on a Tuesday. There was no applause, no ribbon cutting, just Eli, a hammer, and a sky full of quiet. But as he stood back and looked at that frame, he felt something shift. No more proving. No more trying to buy his seat back at tables that had already decided he didn't belong. This wasn't a house for redemption. It was a house for release. He installed the floors slowly, sanding each plank with care. Built the shelves to fit his sketches and the books he used to hide under his bed when he still lived with his parents. He chose the softest light bulbs, the warmest linens, the kind of windows that turned golden near sunset. When the walls were painted and the sink was sealed and the roof stopped leaking, Eli stood in the doorway and breathed in. Not victory, not pride, just peace. He sat on the porch that night, sipping tea under the stars, legs stretched out, shoulders soft for the first time in months. There was no one to congratulate him, no sibling to say you did good. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. He thought of the folding chair by the trash can, the separate table, the quiet rejection that had followed him like a stray dog for years. And he smiled, not bitter, just quiet. He didn't want their house anymore. He didn't want their table. He had built a home where he never had to ask if he was welcome. And in the end, that was worth more than any seat they'd refused to give him. He gave them a house, and they gave him a folding chair. But now every brick he lays is for someone who will never be ashamed of who he is again. What about you? Have you ever had to build a life from scratch just to feel seen? If this story touched something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories. Want me to write the next 5-part series like this? Drop a comment below. I'm reading. Always.